As those of you who are regulars know, it gives me great joy to be here, especially in Adolescent, because this is where the program started. 12 years ago, the 25 parents in the library here at NMA, and in the last 12 years, we've seen over 48,000 attendees to this parent education program. So I really want to thank you all and congratulate you all for being here, because I know you're busy, and taking time out of your lives to do something that's good for your kids and your families is really wonderful. So you are in for a great event tonight. We are happy to see the theater so full, and I know people are going to kind of keep trickling in, but let's get going because we have a wonderful program planned for you tonight. A couple of little details before we get started, okay? We are going to be passing out note cards for questions because we're doing tonight a very interactive workshop. So we have two note card captains, Cynthia over here, and Jessica over here, and Jessica. And so they're going to be holding up note cards. If you have a question that you would like to ask our presenters, and we hope that you'll keep them really sort of general, not specific, hopefully to your own child, but more general. They will hold up your hand, you can get a note card, and then we're going to have you pass them to these middle aisles, okay? I feel a little bit like a Southwest person, but that's what we're going to do, okay? So we'll start passing out note cards for you, in 20 minutes or so. All right. Also, as you came in, you were handed a survey. We really ask that you take 2 minutes at the end of the event to fill this out. It helps us with our planning for next year and with our grant funding. We are very grateful to be funded by the Sequoia Healthcare District and the Sequoia Union High School District, with special funding for speaker fees and honorariums from the MAPTA. So thank you, everybody. Okay, let's get going. All right. This program is the brainchild of Dr. Don Williams. So he is really the producer and my co-collaborator, but we really owe our presenters and this idea to him. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Williams, and then he's going to tell you a little bit more about our presenters, okay? Dr. Don Williams is a child and adolescent psychologist in private practice, specializing in the area of self-regulation disorders. He received his doctorate in clinical psychology from Rosemead School of Psychology in Los Angeles. Dr. Williams also serves on the board of Sunset Youth Services in San Francisco, a nonprofit that supports stability and growth among at-risk youth and families. Please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. Don Williams.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to get a chance to do this, especially with our distinguished panel members. When I originally put this together, my thought with this was that I wanted to help people broaden their view on what's going on with their kids and their development in their later teens. Because I think sometimes when people are having a tendency to get overly narrow with just focusing on building a resume, getting into college, which those are super important things, but I think that when we tend to get too narrow, we lose the big picture. So tonight hopefully is an opportunity to broaden your thinking, to think more about qualities and skills that you would like to try to help either nourish or develop in your kids to help them be prepared to be successful adults in the workplace and in their personal lives. So, like Charlie said, one of the things that I'm most focused on in my practice is helping people with self-regulation. So I'm going to give you guys about 3 minutes on self-regulation, just to give you a bit of a background. So what self-regulation is essentially regulation, like a thermostat brings the temperature down or brings it up to keep it into a comfortable range. So that's the essence of what we have to do. And especially during the high school years when there's a lot of stress, the midbrain, which has emotion, but it also has these things called distress centers. They're like a row of dominoes. There's a lot of activation of those. And when people are not very well regulated, then the distress centers are firing all the time. and people get into overdrive, and then we start having mood problems and being out of balance and not being able to think as clearly and enjoying life. So a lot of times I think when someone is already kind of flooded, our tendency is to just do stuff to stir up the midbrain more, like say, don't worry or something like that. That's not really all that helpful. Anybody here ever found it to be super helpful when someone says, don't worry? Show of hands, okay, everybody's relaxed. Right. So one of the things I talk to people a lot about is the frontal lobes, which is especially the prefrontal cortex, which is the control center of the brain. Right here behind the forehead, there are several functions of that area. One of them is focus, which a lot of people know, basically where you're paying attention. Another one is executive function, which has to do with both executing on tasks, but it also has to do with planning behaviors. Some of that is like the beginning, middle, end of a task, which, like everybody's brain has glitches. My brain has a little glitch for triangle when it comes to task completion, and I've kind of managed to struggle through anyway. But another prefrontal function is when you consciously regulate your body, like when you take a conscious breath. Normally breathing is controlled by your brainstem. While you're taking a conscious breath, your control center actually takes over the regulation of breathing. And why that's super important is that another important part of your control center here is called inhibition. There are these neurons that are called inhibitory neurons that are physically connected from the prefrontal here down into those dominoes, down into the stress centers. And for instance, when you take a conscious breath, those neurons light up and they send some calming chemicals down into the stress brain. Another couple of important prefrontal functions. One is reciprocal communication, when you have that back and forth and when you have a meeting of the minds with someone. And I think that when people are under extreme stress, most people start to become more of a closed system instead of a healthy system that can open and close and open and close. And what ends up happening with that is that someone starts to be more and more left to their own kind of thoughts and theories, and they're not very well tested out. And also they're just not regulated. The last one is like observation or awareness. And I cannot emphasize enough, like there's a huge difference between making observations and thinking. Because it's very easy, if we're just thinking, for the midbrain to take over and for us to just uncritically start believing everything that we think. And I think a lot of the mental health problems that kids are suffering from in our area now partly have to do with that they're so caught up in the beliefs that they think are 100% true that they're becoming more and more under great distress. But when you stop and make some observations, and hopefully you'll hear some great observations tonight, it helps you to get a broader perspective. So, all that said, I'm going to introduce our panel, and I'd like to have each one of you, starting with Jason, Jason Wheeler, say who you are, a little bit about what you're doing work-wise, and we'll get the introductions over with, and then
all right, sounds good. Mic's on?
It's your turn. I'll stop talking.
Can I do a calming breath first?
No, you can't. I've seen you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. Jason Wheeler. Quick background on myself. I graduated from Colorado State University in 1996. And I'm not going to give you my whole LinkedIn profile. That would bore everyone to death. But I just want to highlight that I did go to a state university. I spent some time at HP. I spent 14 years at Google. And most recently, I was the CFO of Tesla. I have left Tesla as of about a month ago, and I'm trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, which I think is probably pretty thematic with everyone in the room, and especially the children.
So if anyone thought they were going to meet Jason and get him to move him up in the queue for a Model 3, that's not going to happen. He has no pull there.
Yeah,
we all tried.
See me after class. A couple things that I think are going to be relevant to this discussion. So let me flash back to my 18-year-old self. So I graduated in a class of 21 in a very underprivileged community. We didn't have a lot of resources at all. I think some of you are probably thinking about SAT and ACT prep. Is that correct? I see a few people nodding. My ACT prep was my mom insisted that I go to bed at 10 o'clock the 2 nights before the ACT. It worked out okay. I did not take the SAT because it wasn't required for any of the colleges that I applied to. Another thing, I was a first-generation college student. My dad was a high school dropout. My mom did about a half a year of nursing school, and that was the extent of the education in the house. And then another, I think, relevant thing growing up in this very rural community, Asian food to us, we called it Oriental food. And it consisted of sweet and sour pork at the Chinese restaurant in the strip mall at the end of the block. And that was the breadth of my horizons at the time. From a work context, I've done over 1,000 interviews, I've hired hundreds of people, and I have 8 former employees of mine that are now CFOs or were formerly CFOs as well. So I think it would be relevant to the discussion.
Great. Thanks, Jason.
My intro is going to sound slightly different. My name is Sydney Davis. I'm the Women's Outreach Specialist at Google. So I work with women who are still in college and are looking to get technical roles at Google and in sort of an entry-level capacity. Before that, I worked on our internship program at Google, specifically with the security function and Google X. And before that, I worked for a nonprofit called Teach for America as a recruiter at Stanford. And I actually also did the Teach for America program as a core member. I taught in Vallejo, which is where I grew up. I taught there the first year that it was the first city in the United States to go bankrupt. Taught the 5th grade. That was very eye-opening because I left a small liberal arts college feeling like I knew everything. I was a star, and let me tell you, there is nothing like a class of 5th graders, 37 of them to be exact, that will really like knock your humility down just a peg. So it was a really good experience. And now I also volunteer for my alma mater as an alumni admissions counselor. So I do interviews for fun as well as for my job. So I'm happy to talk about all of that, and also a first-generation college student. So how about that?
Thanks, Sydney. Andy?
My name is Andy Chen, and because I'll work backwards, I went to a public school, and I'll just leave it at that. We're not supposed to use pronouns here.
This is true.
After I did engineering, and after graduation, I had a decision to work at a large engineering firm that's very well known, or go to this recruiting firm that was unknown at the time. They found my resume, and I think honestly they were just looking for someone who was a human being with a pulse. They were like struggling to hire talent. But I took a chance, moved up to I graduated on Friday, moved up to the Bay Area on Monday, didn't have a place to live, so I slept in the laundry room for 2 months. That's all that I could, no one would give me a job because I had no money. And it was full commission. But the recruiting firm was called Riviera Partners, and it ended up being one of the biggest recruiting firms here in the Bay Area. And we placed a lot of the engineering executives at Facebook and Google, and you name the company. From there, I went to the CIA. I was a weapons analyst there for a number of years, out in McLean, Virginia. And then now I'm at Kleiner Perkins, a venture capital firm here in the Bay Area. And I'm responsible for all the executive recruiting across the firm. And also run something called the KPCB Fellows Program, which is an internship program that puts high-aptitude engineering, design, and product students into our companies for the summer or for the year. So happy to chat about that. And interview count, probably I've interviewed 7,000 or 8,000 people maybe. So.
Thanks, Andy. Joy?
Hi, my name is Joy Vulcan. I'm a relatively recent transplant to the Bay Area. I moved here about 5 years ago from Florida, where I was born and raised. I went to the University of Miami, and then I could not find a job. It was post 9/11 world, and I ended up selling shoes at Nordstrom, which was a job that didn't require a degree. But when I think about my own career, and as we talk through this panel, it was probably the most influential job I could have gotten at the time. So from there, I ended up in a semiconductor company in Florida, which ultimately transferred me out here to California. And about 5 years ago, I took a kind of crazy path to start down the startup track and was at a company called Blue Jeans Network. I joined at about employee 70, and they're sitting at about 500 right now. So help scale that company to that size. And now I'm doing consulting at super tiny startups and just helping them set up for success and hiring. I've run college recruiting before and the talent function, so I don't know how many interviews I've done. Thousands of interviews, so happy to be here.
Thank you, Joy. So, Andy, you want to start us off? We don't have to go in order.
Just because I have this.
Because you have the microphone, I want you to go first. And no, you have to pick the microphone up when you talk. Yeah. So, Andy, well, for one thing, one of the things that we're kind of talking about here is, like, can you say something about the things that guide your thought process as you're interviewing applicants for either the fellowship or executives for your companies?
Yeah. So, look, the concept behind what I do is it centers around there's a lid for every jar. Right? There's no such thing as a perfect person for a perfect job, and it just so happens though the companies that we invest in are it's a pretty intense environment, right? You have high aptitude individuals pursuing the dream to build companies that may one day become the next Google or the next Tesla or the next Facebook. But it takes a lot of hard work. And one of the things I walk out from an interview with an executive is, and I'll get to the interns later on, but is this a big company person or is this a small company person? Right? Do they come to work, and sit at their desk, or maybe there's not even a desk because they have to put it together on the first day. But they get to their desk and they're like, oh, what resources do I have to help build this, right? And at a startup company, you don't have that. And of course, there's all these other things they have to deal with too, but the struggle is real at an early stage company. And so that's one of the things that I definitely filter out for an executive. And I'll talk about the Fellows Program. So the Fellows Program, Don thought this was interesting. So we look for three things, and this is for high school students and also college students applying for summer internships. We made it very clear in the early days that we want to look for three key qualities. One is intelligence, and that could be manifest in any kind of form, whether it's grades, which I think is mediocre at best at telling intelligence, but competitions and things that they've done. The other is leadership. We're moving into an environment where leadership is more and more and more important. You can't just sit in the corner and dream up something. And then the last is the desire to do something beyond what is available in front of you. And this is probably the most important. There are people who you tell them to do something and they just do it. Then there are people you tell them to do something, they come back with an answer even better than you would have expected. And I think that's important. It's this self-drive to kind of want to do something a little bit more, to take risk and embrace failure. And hopefully that shows up on the resume. But we look very clearly for this, and we do interviews, and I think we have 4,000 or 5,000 people who apply, and there's about 80 spots. So it's harder to get into Harvard Business School for our program itself. So,
and Andy, when you're doing those interviews, I know you talked about those kind of three major things you're looking for. How do you begin to make those kind of determinations about who has the qualities you're looking for and who doesn't?
That's a hard thing to do. I don't really care about the school at all. In fact, I read the resume from bottom up. I look at the name, I look at the school, and I look at kind of what they did. What do they do outside of the classroom? Whether it's a club, whether it's an Olympiad, whether it's sports. And it doesn't have to be even applicable to what they or want to study in college, right? But it just shows excellence or mastery of something. And I'm sure you can talk about this with Elon. Elon didn't study engineering. He studied physics, maybe, right? Or studies physics, and yet he's doing all kinds of crazy things. That's an extreme example. Please don't expect your kids to be Elon Musk. But that just the mastery of something, right? Whether it's music, whether it's English, whether it's poetry, it doesn't matter. But if you have that excellence, that just shows aptitude.
You're really anxious to give that away, aren't you? Okay, yeah, you can for now, but it'll come back to you. Hey, Sydney, you want to pick it up?
Sure, yeah.
And one of the things that I would love to hear you tell people about is the evolution of Google's hiring practices. over the years, and like a little more about your experience, because a lot of people are probably surprised when they find out that you're recruiting technical people from liberal arts schools.
Yeah, so you can probably weigh in on this also, because we've evolved a lot. We're an 18-year-old company, so voting age. Yeah, he said he's amazed he ever got hired. I'm frankly not amazed, but yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way. We first just recruited at a few schools because it was, started as a smaller company, and we knew that there were a few technical schools that were just really, really strong. I think Stanford, obviously that's from where our founders were from, so that was sort of the easy fit. It was in our backyard. Over time, we have developed so many more resources, and we've really seen what's worked and what hasn't. You've probably also heard of like the famous Google interview questions. Actually, I got one before they were banned, but it was like, how many tennis balls are on a 747? And the thinking was that in having to describe how you think, we would get some insight into whether you were a fit for the company. That actually proved to not be very true. It turned out that knowing how many tennis balls are on a 747 does not necessarily correlate to being a great employee. So we've radically shifted how we hire a lot over the years, and we're always tweaking it, which I think is really exciting, and it's cool to work at a place where we admit, like, this is probably not perfect how we hire, and we could always be getting better at this. We are in a position right now where we really don't have to look at school. I agree a lot with what was said about what I look for on a resume. I personally only recruit from liberal arts colleges. I think the students are really balanced. They tend to be really focused on impact, which is important to me and important to the company. We obviously recruit from almost every college, and anyone can apply directly to Google, and your resume is still screened by a human, which is pretty cool.
Thanks, Sydney. You're going to hand it to Jason now?
Yeah, sure.
It'd be nice, thank you.
My last interview question at Google was, how many timeshare units are there in the United States?
Yeah, and
I don't know, honestly.
you did say, I don't know,
100,000 or something?
100,000 or something. That was very precise, Jason.
That's not the answer.
Well thought through, okay. So, Jason, I'm curious about kind of with you. We talked a little bit on the phone when you decided to do this about your approach to interviews, and how much of that involves resumes, and what are the main things that you're looking for, and how do you figure those things out with the people you're interviewing?
Yeah, absolutely. So to pick up on the point that Andy made, I like to read resumes from the bottoms up as well. And what's most interesting for me in an interview situation is to get the candidates to tell a story. And this has actually been an interview technique of mine as an interviewee before. I always try to, at least one or two times in an interview, say, let me tell you a story. And the deeper you can get to really understand how a person works, that gives you a better sense of what their values are. As a finance executive, something that I clearly have to value is integrity. So I try to get a sense of, does this person have the integrity to do this job? And long story, I'll make it short. I hired this woman many years ago. The first person I ever had to fire, she lied on her resume and said that she had a college degree, and she didn't. And we could talk about how Google's hiring practice has evolved, but there's that piece of it too. I'll give an example. I hired a woman, I want to say maybe 8-9 years ago at Google, and the top of the resume all looked fine and dandy past the bar, but at the bottom of the resume it said that she was an amateur boxer. So we talked about boxing. And the way that she described the detail and the mastery of what it took to be a boxer and her motivations for learning to box in the first place, I was hooked. And I was like, okay, I want to hire this woman. And she came on and she did just an amazing job. So I'd like to hear those personal stories. And I'll tell you what, this is probably the wrong thing to say in this group, but I've never asked a person how many AP classes they took in high school. All right. I'm glad that's an applause line. Those things are important. You got to get educated, you got to do well, you got to be able to show some of that, but it's that story. The other thing that I really like to look for in candidates is how they deal with fear, or are they constrained by fear? And when you're 22, 23 years old, it's hard not to be fearful of something. I spent my 20s being fearful of whether or not people like me. But let me tell you why this one's important. If you're in a meeting and you're in a company culture that really values teamwork, if you don't speak up, you're not contributing. And a lot of times people won't speak up because they're afraid that their ideas are going to be shunned, or there won't be the ultimate idea. What I've told employees for years and years and years, if you throw an idea out on the table and it moves the discussion further, even if it's not the ending idea or the right idea, you've made the conversation better, and it's highly likely that you're going to get to a better answer because you're facilitating teamwork and consensus building and all of those things. So those are probably the main things that I screen for in interviews. And again, the way that I go about that is just get them to tell a story about their life.
I think one other thing you told me about when we were talking is that you're interested in people's experience with overcoming difficulty or adversity in their life. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And like consulting interviews were the worst when I did those, because what they trained you to do when you got the question, tell me about a time you've overcome. Tell me about a time you've overcome adversity. And then what they train you to say is, well, my junior year I didn't make the varsity football team. So I had to play junior varsity, but I was the captain of the junior varsity team, and by the end of my senior year, I made varsity. Like, oh my God, that's okay. Exactly. Snooze fest. But this gets to the personal stories, and it's great if candidates are willing to talk about that. Like I had a gentleman that I hired many, many years ago. He's now gone on to be a CFO. He talked about doing the work in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro. And, and some of the things that he went through just to do that work, like fearing for his life. And I'm not saying you need to go figure out a way where you're going to put your children in harm's way to be compelling in an interview, but the canned responses to those questions are the ones that you're like, we all have stories. We've all been through adversity. With me, as my parents were alcoholics and this, that, and the other thing, and everybody has got these stories, and if you can tap into that, I think it makes you come across as genuine and interesting in the type of folks that people really want to work with and get to know.
And just out of curiosity, when you hear those canned answers where people have been coached, do you hire those people very often?
I've probably hired a few. In interviews, the other thing that I like to do is I like to probe a little bit. And I've called people out on that a few times and said, look, that's the canned answer. You've been planning this for, give me a real answer. And if I can get someone to reset and go, okay, and then think through another example, I will have hired them.
That's interesting.
So it's not 100%, you give me the canned answer, I'm not going to hire you, but there's got to be something else.
Thanks, that's great. Why don't we give Joy a turn? Joy, I want to hear some more about your hiring practices and what guides your thought process, because you have a specific kind of company that's different than the other panelists are hiring for. So take it away.
It's definitely evolved. When I was at a semiconductor company, we had 2,000 employees. So my interviewing there has changed drastically to how I interview today. Since I joined startups, one of the first questions I love to ask candidates, whether they're my hires or for someone else, is tell me about your first job. And as you were saying, you often do get a canned answer. They're telling you about an internship or something super applicable to what they want to do at your company. And I'll usually stop them after they finish what they're saying and say, okay, let's go back further. I want to hear about something in high school or junior high or even childhood. I want to hear a story about your life where you had to work for something, not necessarily for pay, but you were given a task that you had to complete. And that gives me a lot of insight into, frankly, how much hustle somebody has. That's critical at a startup. You have to have a ton of hustle because you have to have strong work ethic. But it also tells me about kind of their creative juices and how they were solving things earlier in their life before they were possibly coached on how to solve things by a teacher or a parent or mentors or what have you. The other thing it tells me is how proactive they are. And so as I think about people that want to earn something, you go to a startup and you're going to have to work hard and you have to earn things. And so, in digging into that question, into their background, I can figure out how they've gone through their life to overcome a difficulty or accomplish something, through different kinds of jobs they have in their life. But I don't want to hear about the internship.
So, just out of curiosity, what was your first job?
Well, my first job, my parents told me they'd pay for half a car. I didn't tell you this story.
No, you didn't.
I know you're asking, I'm putting you on the spot. So my parents told me when I was 10 or 11, they'd pay for half a car. And I really wanted a car. I lived in a tiny town in Florida. And so I started babysitting. And I made anywhere from $2 to $5 an hour babysitting, which is crazy with what I pay today for babysitting, but nonetheless. And I got a Saturn SC2. It was $11,500. So I saved $5,500 in 6 years. So it really taught me a lot about earning something, owning it, and I worked really hard, and it frankly probably took me away from dating and partying because I was so focused on that vehicle that I didn't have as much fun as I could have because I really wanted that car.
And how did that help you? How did that help you develop?
I think it gave me stamina. I saw big goals. I mean, to me, a car was my independence, and I desperately wanted independence, and I didn't want my parents to have to chauffeur me around, and my parents couldn't afford a car. And so it taught me to respect money. My parents didn't just hand it to me. It also, it taught me to budget. I had a very basic Excel spreadsheet where I was tracking the money that I was earning, and I was actually $500 short in buying the car. So I then had an interest-free loan from my dad, and over 6 months paid it back to $500. So it really taught me to think through how to accomplish something.
Great, thank you. Andy, what was your first job?
This is a really good question. My first job was I was self-employed. I learned how to build computers. This is in the PC world days, and where people would actually build computers and not buy from Dell. And I think I was 13, and I just learned how to do it, and I built it for one of my friends. I built it for myself first, and then for my friend. And the father's like, "Hey, you know how to build computers?" And I built one for him. He was a real estate kind of an estimator. And then he told his buddies, and I started building more, and I charged $55 per computer, and I had an assembly line in my garage where I employed my friends. and we assembled computers. My mom would drive me to PC World, we'd pick up the parts, she'd drive us back, and then we assembled them, and then she would drive us to deliver them. But in 1 year, I made $22,000.
Wow.
As a 13, 14-year-old kid.
Was that before or after you were selling your lunches?
That was after. Yeah, I guess my first job was when my mom would make me 2 lunches because she thought I was a growing kid. I'd sell one to the kid and I'd use that to buy other stuff. But having independence again was really important. And we didn't grow up with a lot of money, and for me the money was important. And it may sound really basic and really just stupid, but I wanted to make money so I can buy Taco Bell. Because my mom, we never ate out. She cooked 365 days a year, and I just really wanted to eat Taco Bell, and she refused to give it to me. So I rode on my bike and I'd ride, it's a mile and a half, and get Taco Bell. 2 chalupas, extra hot salsa. I eat it and then shove the wrappers at the bottom of the trash can so my mom wouldn't find it. So she never knew. She still doesn't know to this day.
Besides teaching you how to be deceptive with your mom, what else did you learn from both of those experiences? In terms of
I learned about hiring people, paying them fair wage. I learned about independence. I learned about pirating software. I learned about the importance of customer service because I made hundreds of computers that summer, and the calls started coming in like, "Hey, something's broken." I'm like, "I don't have a car to go over there." I learned a lot. I learned about the whole supply chain, boarding a computer, putting it together, and doing sales. This is as a 14-year-old kid. It didn't make any sense to me at the time. It was just me trying to get money to buy Taco Bell. But in retrospect, I learned a lot of valuable lessons in kind of standing up for yourself, hiring people, firing my 13-year-old friend because he didn't show up in my garage. Anyways, so a lot of these lessons that are applicable, but I think it was a really good experience.
Great. Sydney, first job?
I was a pet sitter. I wanted an American Girl doll. My parents and I had to raise the money. I think they were $85 when they first came out. And I was a pet sitter. I learned the importance of investing money in your business so that you could grow it because I had business cards made. And then I would like openly recruit. I would see people like walking dogs and I would say like, oh, did you ever go on vacation? I was like 9. It must have been very, I don't know, it must have been really off-putting to people. And then this was before cell phones, and so I would leave a note daily with what happened, and I would draw pictures of the animal before you could like text pictures of your dog being babysat. And I would say like, oh, Monday, collected your mail, threw the ball 10 times. And people really seemed to like that, and I felt like it gave me a competitive advantage.
Wow.
So yeah.
Service, wow.
It's quite the business model. And then I think I worked at a barbecue joint, like slinging ribs for 5 years, and that taught me that that was awful, and that I definitely didn't want to do that. So I better buckle down and get good grades because I definitely didn't want to work in a restaurant without air conditioning one day more.
Sounds good. Jason, first job?
I did a bunch of crazy stuff. First job, 10 years old. We lived in a trailer park in the northern suburbs of Denver, and I mowed lawns. And that was fascinating. I learned lots doing that. So one, the maintenance of the lawnmower, but I'd go and knock on doors, up and down the block, up and down the block. Collections was interesting, I did some of that, but it was just good hard work. Number of other jobs, including in college, I waited tables in a sports bar, and more valuable than any internship type role that I ever had. You learn how to deal with people. And I get worried about like our kids with these things. And he's walking down the street like this, and I think just basic human skills and the ability to hustle, the point that Joy was making, those are the things that we really need to instill in our kids, and that's what we need in the workplace.
You're a parent. You have some clear-cut values of what you think are important in terms of qualities and skills for kids, and including your kids, to develop. What are some of the things that you do to promote that?
Yeah, absolutely. So our mantra in our house is hard work, and the results don't matter. I have this talk, and it's about that time now where I'll grab all 3 of the kids and I'll say, the grades that you're going to get in a couple of weeks don't matter because I've been watching and you're working hard. So I'm a firm believer of praise the effort and not the results. The other thing that we really work hard with the kids on is integrity and just doing the right thing. So those are I think the things that we talk the most about in the house.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to pass it back down to Joy. Joy, we also talked a little bit about some of the other ways you try to determine if people have kind of a will-do-anything kind of team orientation, especially for a startup where you never know what you're going to be asked to do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it links a little bit to the first job, but one of the things I talk about is a culture of you have to be willing to mop the floors. But I'm not kidding. You may have to mop the floors. I think for me, there's a level of humility. I call it humble confidence at work, but there's a level of humility and confidence needed to do well in a startup because you could be, cleaning up the snack room and then, coding the software 2 minutes from there. And so the questions that I'll ask around that are related to the first job. I'll also ask if they can talk to me about the difficulties they've had in projects or with people and to walk me through how they resolve them. It's a lot of behavioral interviewing. Frankly, that's kind of the skill set that I've employed with the managers I work with. And then I ask them if they can walk me through a situation, a job, a story where they left something better than they found it. And it's interesting when you get stories out of that as well because, I think people are really digging for, I think I leave a lot of things better than I found it, but I don't want to hear about school. I don't want to hear about, something academic. I want to hear about, again, a story that will give me more insight into how they tick and how they work and what they're proud of.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And by the way, what's the normal response when you ask somebody if they're willing to clean up a spill and mop the floors?
I get a blank stare every time, and I'm super sassy, so like if they won't laugh with me when I'm like, no, I'm really serious, are you willing to mop the floors? If they don't like giggle a little bit, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know if I want to work with you. Like that's what I'm thinking, because, you know, you gotta kind of roll with it. In startups, you're working really hard, and if there's not like levity and laughter in the workplace, it's hard to be motivated to spend that much time there. So I'm looking for people that like want to have a good time. And enjoy what they do and enjoy the hard stuff and enjoy some of the basic stuff that you'll encounter in a startup. But you're just heavily challenged there, so I think having fun and knowing that you could be doing a variety of things day in and day out is really critical to being a good team member.
In terms of resume, like how much time do you spend on people's resume?
So I'm using Greenhouse, which is an ATS right now. It's pretty common in the Bay Area. It times me as I'm going through resumes. Spending 10 to 14 seconds right now on a resume. I'm fast.
Are you talking about just reading through a bunch of resumes? That's a pretty thorough read there.
That's
It's
very
really
good.
got a lot of detail. I'm really
Very
impressed. Speed reading is good. It's good stuff, Joey. And then there must be certain things you've trained your eyes to look for as either a thumbs up or thumbs down. Like what are some of those things?
Yeah, I start bottoms up just like they're talking about. I probably can't tell you half the time what school someone's gone to. We do some filtering questions within our ATS, which helps us know, walking into looking at a resume that somebody's hit the bar on 4 or 5 qualifying questions. But I'm looking for, have they kept a job longer than a year or 2? That's very common in the Valley for people to job hop very quickly. And I need to find somebody that's, gone somewhere and stuck it out for a couple years to make a difference. If the 10 years, 12 to 18 months, that's very unappealing to me because, we need someone that's going to really come in and make an impact, as small as the company is, and the investment to find talent is expensive. I look at projects that they've worked on, but then the qualifying questions do go back to projects they've worked on as well as different skill sets that they need for the job. So like I said, the qualifying questions really help us to ascertain if they've got some of the basic technical skills, and then I'm looking for how well-rounded are they in their tenure and sticking it out.
Okay, that's helpful. So, hey, Andy, what about you in resumes? Can you kind of pick up where Joy left off in terms of,
Sure.
as you're reading through those, what's your process like?
Whenever I see a 4.0, I get really concerned. Or a 5.0 if you went to MIT. Because I always brace myself for those phone conversations. Because I'm almost always disappointed. Because the person focused so much on the grades that they forgot about the rest of college. They forgot about doing extracurriculars. They forgot about joining a fraternity or sorority. They forgot about, having fun. And just building character and experiences that I think really do matter. Relationships with other individuals. There's always the rare case of that person got a 4.0 because it was so easy and they had all this time to do other stuff, and that you really want to hire them. And Google's practice art of hiring people like that. But most of the time I'm disappointed. And I used to be really kind of wary of people who got a low GPA, but then I started realizing that really doesn't matter. It's what you do with the time that you have in college, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter what college you go to. One of our fellows, his name is Steven, he went to San Jose State. It's a good school, but people don't consider it an elite school. And he got a 3.1 GPA. But somehow he got picked up by Facebook because someone recognized his raw talent. And he was one of the best system engineers. And now he's basically the lead system engineer at the age of 23 for a major website that serves 120 million people. Right? And he's just like insanely talented, but you would never know looking at the resume until you read into all the extracurricular things that he did. He started competing on competitions and winning, and that just shows mastery over his skill.
Just out of curiosity, how do resumes to you?
How do the resumes get to me? Oh my gosh, all sorts of ways. If I'm wearing a Google sweatshirt in the airport, I'll take anyone's resume. And people actively don't wear their Google sweatshirts. I'm like, I'm wearing it. You never know who's out there. So I get handed them all the time in all sorts of places. So that's another good lesson is like, have a resume and have it look decent. It doesn't have to be crazy, but have it look decent and be ready. Like, this is the Silicon Valley. You could be in Starbucks behind Elon Musk. Like, have that resume ready to go. Have your like 1-minute elevator pitch on why you're awesome ready to go. So yeah, I've gotten all sorts of that, but I go to college career fairs. I go to resume workshops with veterans groups, all sorts of different groups, but I get tons of resumes through all different resources, and I take as much time as I want on them and try to find people a role.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
What about you? How do resumes get to you?
How do they look?
How do they get to you?
Oh, goodness. Sometimes from Andy. They come a lot now through referrals. So we have a very high percentage of referrals. So that leads back to your network, right? Who do you know? How can you get to places? And it's amazing to me today, you know, from LinkedIn to social media, how we get resumes, because they come from not usually the career portal, which, you know, as recruiters, that's kind of what you're taught is post on your career portal, people will come. They don't really come as often as you would think. Maybe at Google they do, or Tesla. I don't know. You're scrappy too? Okay. So, you know, I think the referral and making sure that your student, as they grow up, they're ready to network and they're ready to meet people and go out and be in networking groups. So that's how I got my first job in HR. I joined an HR networking group, but I didn't have a job in HR, nor did I have any experience. So I just started talking to people and getting to know them, and that led to being introduced to some interviews. So I think it's a lot about who you know today.
Yes. So, some people have passed up some interesting questions.
Yeah.
So I'll choose a few for us to go over. A couple of people have variations on this theme. If a person has had a pretty boring life, but it's brilliant, would you overlook them and would that lead you to potentially miss good candidates? Please say yes. Why don't you start?
Well, I'd be curious what they do in their spare time. Like, it's okay to have a boring life. I feel like I've had a relatively boring life, but what do I do in my spare time? Like, what do I do Saturday, Sunday? What gets me excited? And I think once you're talking to a candidate and you're seeing what makes them light up, that really leads you to knowing if they're going to be excited about being in your culture and being at that particular job. So boring life's not a bad thing. We don't want you to make up stories to excite the recruiter, but, you know, that would be bad. That would probably not go over too great. But knowing what you're excited about and being able to tell stories behind it, I think that's a critical part of the process. You know, you want to be a human being. You don't want to be a rehearsed interviewer. It's so obvious, I think, probably to this whole panel when you're getting the canned responses. And there's hundreds of books out there to give you the canned responses. And I would discourage anyone from reading them because I don't think that actually helps you in the process to become a person. Bring on.
I will say for parents out there where you're pretty well situated financially, though, that you know, not paying for everything for your kid and letting your kid figure out how to get a job and pay for some expenses can be super helpful.
Yes.
Because at their level, it's distracting and having to plan, having to get out, go out, get a job, go to work, show up. Many years ago, I worked with somebody who had done extremely well in high school, graduated top of his class, and then kind of bombed out at a school back east, and they put him on probation, and he wasn't doing the greatest job of going to class, and so part of what they required him is him enduring an hour every week. And he had to get a job, and they wanted to talk to his employer at the end of 5 months to make sure he was showing up. So I think besides that, especially in general with kids who've gone off, they struggled, maybe they weren't really ready for college. They come back, it's great for them to get a job. A lot of times it's a great reset for kids, so I wanted to add that. Jason, you had talked about maybe you value people in that story, but I think some people out there are afraid that people don't make the cut on early life adversity that you're not going to take a look at. Is that accurate?
No, that's not accurate at all. Everybody's got a different story, and sometimes the story you don't have to have. Like, I've got this very interesting background, but you don't have to have that. The other thing that makes a difference too is this a person that you want on your team? And I'm a big team guy. I'm all about, I think, if you've got a good team, the sum of the parts is much less than the sum of the whole. And so it's things like that, being able to interact with folks, being able to push ideas forward. So no, you don't have to have this crazy story of adversity to make the cut, but it's helpful. If you did, and it's helpful, here's the important thing on this. If you do have it, don't be afraid to tell the story.
Yeah, and to add to what you were saying, Sydney, actually Sydney and I worked on a panel last year. We did a very sacred heart. And a few months ago, there was a barista at the East in our office who got to know, and I found out that he was done with college, had an engineering degree, he was kind of stuck in the job search, and just really wasn't putting any energy into it. So I asked Sydney, "Do you want to talk to him?" She was. He didn't know to work for Google, but that got him unstuck, and within a month, he got another job. He got a real engineering job. So I think that, if somebody's fresh out of college, go work at a coffee shop and start talking to people and telling them what you're up to.
I mean, I think that happened also because, I'm in the right job for me. I love my job. I love recruiting. So when I get those emails, I'm never like, ugh. It's exciting to me to try to find the right spot for someone. And that's an advertisement for why you should make sure your kid finds the right job for them, because then it's not going to feel like work and they're going to be passionate about it. But I mean, whoever asked that question, I get what you're going for, but literally the best hire I've ever made, they were launching weather balloons for fun. I don't know that those are the most exciting people I've ever heard of traditionally, but they had a way of selling it, right? That was cool to them. I just did an interview of a woman who wanted to go to my alma mater, and she was really into beekeeping. And when she first started talking about it, I was like, oh Lord, beekeeping. And then she just was so excited about beekeeping, and she could tell me so much about it, and she could tell me about how it relates to, what she sees in the world. It was the best interview I've ever had. But I would never say beekeeping is the most exciting thing ever. I think it's what excites you. I would wager there's not a lot of brilliant people who don't have something that excites them. Yeah.
I was thinking about kind of on having a story, kind of on being scrappy in the hustle. So I think when things are provided fully for children, so I'm going to go back to a story of mine when I was 22 and had the job selling shoes at Nordstrom. My AC went out in that car that my parents split with me. And I remember calling my mom. I'm like, I'm on full commission at Nordstrom. I don't have money for an AC, and I'm working in this very lovely department store. I need air conditioning in my car. I live in Florida. And my parents said, sorry, it's not our job to fix your air conditioning in your car. And so I remember driving home in the heat, exhausted, thinking about how I was going to solve it. And the solve was I had to come into work 30 minutes early for my body to kind of dry off from the sweat. I had baby wipes. I went to work in my exercise clothes and would meander into the employee bathroom and wait until I cooled down and figured it out. So that's not a terrible life story, but it's a scrappy story. Had my parents sent me the money, I wouldn't have a story to tell. And it really taught me how to problem solve on something kind of silly and simple, but how to figure something out on your own, I think is very critical.
Yeah, if you have a boring resume, you just haven't found what you cared about yet. And you owe it to yourself at this age, I'm talking to the kids, and any age, but you owe it to yourself to find out what really moves you. And when you do find it, it's very natural and it's very energizing. I'm fortunate to find what I care about and love, and most people don't. They think that working at this great company is the pinnacle of their life, when maybe they want to be a musician, right? And they could have been the next Yo-Yo Ma. Don't let other people tell you what is most important to you. And, it's not easy. A lot of people can live an entire life and never find that. But you have to try. You have to try and find what matters to you and stick to that and believe it, because you know yourself better than anyone else.
So, hang on to that microphone, because I want you to start feeling this. A couple of people have gotten the impression that you guys are against people with a 4.0, and they're punishing their ambition. Could you address that?
I'm definitely not throwing out 4.0s.
So I talked to them all, but I braced myself for the fact that this person could have spent their entire life, or their entire 4 or 3, for so they're overachievers, 3 years of college, striving for a perfect degree. So look, if I see a 4.0, I am not turning that away. I'm going to interview with the person, right? Just like if I get a strong recommendation from someone, I owe it to that person. I owe it to their hard work and ethic to interview that person. But more often than not, it comes out disappointing. I don't know what I can say more than that. If you live for a grade, you're going to be really disappointed when you go to work. When there are no constraints and there's competition, there's politics.
Very little praise.
Yeah, and there's very, very little. It will depend on which company you're at. But most companies, again, right? It's going to be rough, right? You don't have this nice little final that you can take, that you can study from the textbook, and all the answers are there, buried deep, right? This is life, and life is hard, and life is unpredictable, and things could change. One day you could be the top cell phone manufacturer in the world, called no BlackBerry, and then the next day you're in a museum, right? And so school is great because it allows you to train your mind when things are not at stake. But when things are at stake, you have to change the way you approach it.
I would also say, though, since I went to graduate school, that in undergrad was just a means to an end for me. And so, when you're in a situation like that, the grades are super important to get into the graduate school.
Yes.
What was great for me is once I got to graduate school, I could just focus on learning. And I wasn't worried about grades. And I didn't have the time to be able to stop.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Now, I anticipated this question, given the conversation, and the point isn't, well, if your child goes to the junior college and gets a 2.9, but was the beer pong champion for 2 years in a row, they're golden, right? They're probably not going to get hired at Facebook with that. So achievement and ambition is obviously wonderful, and I will always interview those folks as well. And I have a similar story to Don, where I ended up at the State University. That's the only place I could afford to go, and that's the only opportunity I saw in front of me. I did very well there. I graduated top of my class. But I like those stories. I like hiring the kids from the state universities that brought themselves up by their bootstraps and did something. And this goes back to the other question from earlier, too, on boring. It's okay to be boring, and you don't have to have this great story of adversity, but and you all know this, but when our kids get out there in the real world, they're going to face adversity all the time. And it's more of a question of how are they going to react to that. And the more training and the more experiences that they can have early on to start to deal with failure, to deal with adversity, I just think the more adaptable they're going to be in the workplace.
So, Cindy, this is a good one for you. Someone said, I know 750 engineers in Facebook or Google don't know anyone who graduated from a no-name school. What are the
Really?
employees not in the top tier schools in your engineering teams?
I mean, I can't share numbers, but I'm trying to find a way that I could break this down. I swear I'm not lying. Okay, so more schools that we recruit at Actively are probably not the top ones. We still make a lot of hires at CMU, Stanford, MIT, the usual suspects. But I was just in our meetings, designing our strategy for the next 5 years, and I think depending on the age of the person asking this question, that may sort of have been the way things were done at the beginning, because we were making less hires, and those were the tried and true results. The problem with hiring from those places is it brought very little diversity of thought with it when we hired from the same colleges. So the reason we've branched out, and I think that's probably gained the most momentum in the last 5 years, certainly since I've been there in the last 5 years, is that we get a broader diversity of thought. These are people who can problem solve, not better, but just by bringing more people to the party, we get more problems solved by looking at people who have a little bit more diversity and adversity in their background. So, I mean, I can't argue with what you know to be true, but it's also true that we do a lot of hiring from, I won't call them no-name schools because I don't really like that, from lesser known usual suspects. I will also say that I hire plenty of people with 4.0s. I think the point we're trying to make is like it's kind of a choose your own adventure, right? So there's some students who have amazing grades, that's kind of their deal. There's a lot of students who have maybe a little bit less, but they have a lot of leadership. There's other students that I hire because I only hire engineers who, like, I would call just like tinkerers. They just are constantly working on things, so they have more like project work. They go to every hackathon. They'll show you the app they made. There's more than one way to do this, I think, is the point we're trying to get across. You don't have to have a 4.0, go to every hackathon, hold every leadership position. That's not gonna work. You can kind of choose your own path and like mix and match from that menu of items is what I would say. And if you have a 2.7, like that's gonna make things a lot harder for you. You're gonna have to have a lot more hustle. So it's not like, you know, get a 2.7 and that will guarantee that you get a job.
I don't want to get the facts incorrect, but I'm thinking, you know, Alan Eustace was head of engineering forever at Google. He was the head of HP Labs for some period of time. I'm pretty sure he went to the University of Central Florida. If Alan was here, he'd probably throw something at me because
he shows up all the time.
he does. He's great. So Omid Kordestani, the guy that ran the global sales and marketing function for Google from the early days all the way until just recently, went to San Jose State. There's lots of examples out there. It doesn't, to be successful and do well in these companies, you don't have to have gone to Stanford and got the 4.0.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question is asking about how references weigh in or added to the equation.
So you don't give a reference that's not going to be a good reference, right? So what I've found at startups, and I'm not sure if you guys are doing this too, we do a lot of backdoor references. Social media gives us avenues to see people at your company that are connected to people from their company. So the best references we get are not the ones that are given to us, and they're very common.
Andy, do you have any of that?
You know, when I was in high school, I was busting my butt to do well in school, and there was this guy next to me in my calculus class that cheated his way through calculus, and he got the same grade that I did, and I was so pissed off. But history has a way of correcting itself, and you know, try not to pay attention to that. But what I'm trying to say is, like, bad behavior will get caught eventually. Sometimes it doesn't, but like really rarely. And that's why back channel references are so important. If you do an honest day's work and you work your best and you deliver to the company, and just good work will be rewarded. And know that. And we'll catch you suckers if you don't.
Remind me not to play poker with you.
Yeah.
Oh, don't do that. Sorry.
Sydney?
Yeah.
I want you to deal with this when we start off. How essential is a college degree?
Oh, so again, kind of similar to the GPA is how I would answer this. So when you were giving your examples of Alan and other people, like my favorite engineer that I work with didn't graduate from college. She went a different route. She had a lot of industry experience, starting with like repairing computers and now working all the way up to she's a software engineer at Google. We're in a place now where it doesn't necessarily matter. It's so weird to recruit for tech because it's unlike any other field I've ever seen where you can entirely self-teach, which I don't know of a lot of other industries that are like that. And there's so many things cropping up, especially around here, that are not universities but are still teaching people how to do the necessary skills in computer science. And I think that's just very, very interesting, right? Like now you can log on and see the intro level class at MIT or Stanford, and you can follow along with the whole thing online. That's pretty cool, and I think it's gonna change the way that we view college. that goes with saying that most people we hire have a college degree by and large. So again, kind of like what I said with GPA, like if you have a 2.7, you're gonna have to hustle way more. If you didn't go to college and you apply to Google, you're gonna have to prove it in so many other ways that it would be a lot, but people do it. So, and I was just on a call with like Lyft, how Lyft hires their engineers. They also they're at a place now where they don't only recruit college graduates. They now are looking at people who just have experience as well and are self-taught.
Okay.
Yep.
A couple of other people were asking about sort of how do you suss out the difference between someone who's spiritual and someone who's just more of a quiet introvert.
Oh, good question.
Jason, you want to start with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm an introvert, believe it or not, by nature, but I've had to learn to play an extrovert on TV. So I think I've always had a bit of an intuitive sense on the different types of personalities. And the way that I've dealt with this is it's not always easy to pick this up in an interview setting, and if you guys have best practices on this, please share. But I was usually able to pick it up in a coaching situation with an employee. Worked with many shy folks, and you tend to get a lot of introverts in finance. And it's just about the approach, and I would talk to them one-on-one and say, let's try it. Let's set a goal, 1 or 2 times in, the next 2 weeks. I'd like to just hear more from you in a meeting, and whatever it is. So it's a little bit more difficult to screen and suss out the difference between the two. On the job, it's much easier. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel pretty strongly about this because I'm an introvert, which is ironic because I'm a recruiter. But people who are introverts, they may be quiet externally, but they're not quiet internally. And the moment you ask them for a thought, brilliance can come out. A good example of this, when Charlie Cheever and Adam D'Angelo are the co-founders of Quora, when they started the company, they had reached out because they're looking to recruit their first engineers. And so I had never met them, and it was my first time. And so I go there with my boss, and the boss is like, just by the way, they're kind of weird. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? So we sit down. This is at University Cafe when it was still there in Palo Alto Avenue. I sit down for lunch. Adam looked like he was wearing a sweater that he's been wearing since he was a kid. Charlie didn't make eye contact with me. We ordered lunch. Adam had a sandwich. Charlie had a salad. Charlie ate the salad with his hands. Still didn't look at me. And I'm like, what is happening, right? This is off to a swimming start. But I asked them, okay, tell me what you're building and who you're looking to hire. They were the most eloquent individuals. I was blown away by the clarity of thought of what they were trying to build. And just because someone doesn't say something in a meeting does not mean they don't have any thoughts. So I think we live in a society where extroverts are rewarded. I think too often, to be frank. And people who are extroverts owe it to themselves and the team to pull out that information from the introverts, to ask around the table. I want to hear everyone's thoughts. Otherwise, you should not be at this meeting. But they may be quiet physically, but they're internally, some of the best ideas are from introverts.
I agree. Ditto.
Hey, anyone, hang on to the mic, because one person asks, what do government agencies, for example, the CIA, look for? Anything different from tech companies?
Are you allowed to answer that? I will check your Facebook.
Yeah. I don't know how to answer that. I worked, maybe this is comforting to the people in the room, but some of the brightest people I've ever worked with were in the CIA.
That is comforting.
That's really all I can say. We pass a physical test, we have vision tests. They look for just over government.
I interned in Congress every year, which was great because I was sure I wanted to work in politics, and thank God. I hated every internship I had, and it really showed me that that was not the path for me. But I got all of those jobs through networking. So I went to a smaller liberal arts college. I would reach out. I applied for 60 internships one year, and I got 2 of them. I used to hang up my rejection notices like on the wall as kind of like a funny thing. And I think like also, teach your kids to like take rejection in stride, right? Like I was like, I'm gonna get a lot of rejection, and I just have to like power through. But definitely, you should choose your college carefully because it's a huge networking tool that has the power to open lots of doors. But yeah, they definitely checked all of my social media, so be aware that that's going to happen. And they said that they wanted like someone to work in the office that they wanted to be around, because usually in government, I guess at least on the Hill, you spend a lot of hours together, so they want to make sure that someone's sociable and again will kind of be a jack of all trades. I was like frequently running for coffee and grabbing like the right pair of shoes for this congresswoman who shall remain nameless, and lots of stuff like that. So sort of similar, they want scrappiness, was my impression. Probably different for CIA versus...
Yeah, sorry, I dodged the question because, to be frank, they don't look for anything different than Google, really. The one thing that you have to be sure of before you ever join government, if you are considering government, is you join government as service to the nation. And you're going to be reminded of that every day when politics gets in the way and you realize your paycheck was cut in half from when you were working at Facebook. Because, the government it's service. It really is. Just like joining the military. I'm not that drastic, but it is service to the nation. So be mentally prepared for that.
I had several people ask me, start with Joy, if you even read the cover letters, so is it you're saying 8 to 14 second or whatever?
No, I read cover letters. I don't get very many. Do you get a lot? I would say I'm in the single-digit percentage of applicants including a cover letter, so they're rare. And when I say I read them, I probably get through like the first paragraph, so I'm not reading 7 paragraphs or 4, but I'll see if something is exciting in the first paragraph that grabs my attention. But they're not common with startups. I don't know if they're common anywhere else.
Nope.
So for engineering roles, we say they're optional, and we mean don't do it. They take like a weirdly long time to craft. I think maybe, I don't want to generalize, but I think probably especially for engineers who are just like kind of not used to talking about themselves in that way. And so I always tell my candidates, like, if you're going to spend an hour doing a cover letter or an hour working on your technical interview, like, please prep for your technical interview. That's way more important. For our non-technical roles, we do receive cover letters, and I think they are generally read. I would just say when you're applying, especially because we just talked about government jobs, they probably definitely read cover letters, because I think generally things that are a little bit more traditional roles are going to rely on like more traditional means of gathering information. So when you're applying to roles, you just really, really need to pay attention to what they're asking for and meet all of their criteria. And then you really have to have a keen attention to detail. So I frequently get resumes that say objective, which just take the objective off your resume. It's useless. Like, we know you're trying to get a job because you gave me your resume. But it'll say like objective, get an internship at Facebook. And I'm like, oh, so awkward. So just, and I'm never like in the trash. Like, I'm just like, that's so funny. But don't, like, really have a keen attention to detail. If you want a job, you should be writing individual cover letters to every organization that asks for a cover letter, and they should be highly tailored if they do ask for one, but just really pay attention to the criteria.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add to that is I get a lot of resumes through LinkedIn now. And I'll read that email, but if that email is, hi, Jason, I did da-da-da-da-da, and it's kind of just a form letter, I'm like, eh. But if this is just a networking trick, if there's a hook that says something interesting in the first sentence or two, or is, hey, I also went to Colorado State, or something like that, I think it can be effective. And I think it will improve your chances of having the rest of the letter, and more importantly, the resume looked at.
The cover letter is your chance to say what's on the resume. If you say what's on the resume, you wasted your cover letter, or if it's an email, whatever it is. And so if it's an important story you wanted to share, you should absolutely share it in the cover letter. Everything else that's on your resume, skip it. And anything that's not qualifiable, meaning I'm a hard worker, I really want to work for your company, I am diligent, I can type, really fast, like those things, they don't matter. It's the story of who you are, what you did, that you worked at Nordstrom's and you got to work, half an hour early to dry off.
It's a good visual.
in your sweatpants is really, it's I don't know, it just shows character. And if you do want to use the cover letter for that, it's interesting, and I'm going to read it, versus just skip over it.
Okay, thanks guys. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to give a round of applause for our Austin company. And welcome to the Vulcan.
Yeah.